Imagine this, a young woman, barely out of her teens, standing at the altar, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She's wearing a dress that costs more than most people's yearly salary, but she feels like an imposter in her own life. Across from her stands a man who could buy entire cities with the snap of his fingers, yet his eyes are cold, distant, and utterly unreadable. He's a billionaire, a titan of industry, a man who has everything except love. She's inexperienced, naive, and utterly out of her depth. But what happens next will shock you to your core. This isn't just a story about a marriage of convenience or a Cinderella fantasy. This is a tale of two souls, broken in their own ways, who find each other in the most unexpected of places. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why their story has captivated millions. But here's the real question. Can love truly blossom in the most unlikely of circumstances? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? Stick around because this story will leave you breathless. Now, let's talk about you for a second. Yes, you. Why are you here? What made you click on this video? Was it the promise of a love story that defies all odds? Or maybe you're curious about the billionaire lifestyle, the glitz, the glamour, the secrets that come with unimaginable wealth. Whatever brought you here, I can promise you this, by the time this video is over, you'll have answers to questions you didn't even know you had. You'll feel a connection to these characters that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And you'll understand why this story is more than just a fairy tale. It's a reflection of the human condition, of our deepest desires and our greatest fears. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into a world where love and money collide in the most spectacular way. Let's set the stage. Our story begins in a world where money talks, but love is silent. A world where power is everything and vulnerability is a weakness. Enter our heroine, a 20-year-old woman named Emily. She's not your typical protagonist. She's not a damsel in distress, nor is she a femme fatale. She's just ordinary. And that's what makes her extraordinary. Emily grew up in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and dreams are often sacrificed for practicality. She's never been in love, never even been on a proper date. But when her family falls on hard times, she's thrust into a world she never could have imagined. A world where her innocence is both her greatest asset and her biggest liability. And then there's him. Alexander Blackwood. The name alone sends shivers down the spines of those who know him. He's a billionaire, a self-made man who clawed his way to the top with sheer willpower and an unyielding determination. But behind the cold exterior lies a man who has never known love. His childhood was marked by neglect, his adolescence by betrayal, and his adulthood by isolation. He's a man who has everything, yet feels nothing. And when he meets Emily, he sees something in her that he can't quite understand. Something pure, something real. But can he let down his guard long enough to let her in? Or will his past continue to haunt him, keeping him trapped in a prison of his own making? As the story unfolds, we'll explore themes of love, power, and redemption. We'll see how two people from completely different worlds can find common ground, and how love can be both a healing force and a destructive one. We'll delve into the complexities of human relationships, and how sometimes the people we least expect can change our lives in ways we never thought possible. But here's the thing, this isn't just a love story. It's a story about self-discovery, about finding the courage to be vulnerable, and about the transformative power of love. And by the end of this video, you'll be rooting for Emily and Alexander in a way you never thought possible. But before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were meant for something more? Like there's a part of you that's just waiting to be discovered? That's exactly how Emily feels. She spent her entire life playing it safe, doing what's expected of her. But when she meets Alexander, something inside her awakens. She starts to question everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, about life. And as she embarks on this journey of self-discovery, she realizes that sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. So, what about you? Are you ready to take that leap of faith? Are you ready to see where this story takes you? Because trust me, you're in for one hell of a ride. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The age gap. Yes, Emily is 20 and Alexander is significantly older. But this isn't a story about a sugar daddy and his young bride. This is a story about two people who find each other at the right time, in the right place, and for the right reasons. It's about how love can transcend age, status, and even logic. It's about how two people can come together and create something beautiful, even when the odds are stacked against them. But here's the twist. Their journey isn't going to be easy. There will be obstacles, there will be heartbreak, and there will be moments when you'll wonder if they're going to make it. But that's what makes this story so compelling. It's real, it's raw, and it's relatable. And by the end of this video, you'll be on the edge of your seat, desperate to know what happens next. So let's get back to the story. Emily and Alexander's marriage starts off as a business arrangement. He needs a wife to secure a business deal, and she needs the money to save her family. But as they spend more time together, something unexpected happens. They start to connect on a deeper level. They start to see each other not as pawns in a game, but as real people with real feelings. And as they navigate the complexities of their relationship, they begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, they found something worth fighting for. But here's the catch. Alexander's past is about to catch up with him, and it's going to threaten everything they've built. So what happens next? Will they be able to overcome the obstacles in their path? Or will their love story end before it even begins? As we delve deeper into their story, we'll explore the power dynamics at play, the sacrifices they'll have to make, and the lengths they'll go to protect what they found. We'll see how love can be both a source of strength and a source of weakness, and how sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let someone in. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story about Emily and Alexander. It's a story about all of us. It's about the choices we make, the risks we take, and the love we fight for. And by the end of this video, you'll see yourself in these characters, and you'll understand why their story is so important. But before we go any further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your head and your heart? Where you had to weigh the pros and cons and make a decision that could change your life forever? That's exactly where Emily finds herself. She's torn between her duty to her family and her growing feelings for Alexander. She knows that if she follows her heart, she could lose everything. But if she doesn't, she could lose herself. And as she struggles with this impossible choice, she begins to realize that sometimes the only way to find true happiness is to take a leap of faith. So, what would you do in her shoes? Would you play it safe, or would you risk it all for love? As we near the end of this introduction, I want to leave you with this thought. Love is never easy. It's messy, complicated, and often painful. But it's also the most beautiful thing in the world. And in the case of Emily and Alexander, it's the one thing that could save them both. But here's the cliffhanger. Just when they think they found their happily ever after, a secret from Alexander's past comes to light, threatening to tear them apart. Will they be able to overcome this new obstacle? Or will their love story end in tragedy? You'll have to keep watching to find out. But one thing's for sure, this is a story you won't want to miss. So grab some popcorn, get comfortable, and let's dive into the world of Emily and Alexander. Trust me, you're in for a wild ride. Emily's life before Alexander was a quiet one, filled with the kind of simplicity that only small-town living can offer. She grew up in Willow Creek, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as a snowstorm in July. Her parents, hardworking and kind, ran a modest bakery that had been in the family for generations. The smell of fresh bread and pastries was the backdrop of her childhood, and she had always assumed she'd take over the bakery one day. But life had other plans. When her father fell ill, the medical bills piled up and the bakery began to struggle. Emily, who had always been the responsible one, felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She dropped out of community college to help at home, but it wasn't enough. The family was drowning and she was desperate for a lifeline. That's when the offer came, a proposal that would change her life forever. A wealthy businessman, a friend of a friend, had heard about their plight and suggested a solution: a marriage of convenience to Alexander Blackwood, a man who needed a wife to secure a lucrative business deal. At first, Emily laughed it off. The idea was absurd, almost laughable. But as the days passed and the bills kept coming, she began to consider it. What did she have to lose? Her pride? Her freedom? Those seemed like small prices to pay to save her family. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of duty, she agreed. Alexander's world, on the other hand, was as far removed from Willow Creek as one could imagine. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, a sprawling space filled with modern art, sleek furniture, and an air of cold perfection. His life was a carefully curated facade, designed to keep the world at arm's length. He had built his empire from the ground up, starting with nothing but a sharp mind and an unrelenting drive. But success came at a cost. His childhood had been marked by neglect. His parents were more interested in their social status than in raising a child. He learned early on that love was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited. And so, he buried his emotions deep, building walls so high that no one could climb them. By the time he reached his 40s, he was a billionaire, but he was also alone. His relationships were transactional, his friendships superficial. He had everything, yet he felt nothing. When the opportunity arose to marry Emily, he saw it as just another business deal. She was young, naive, and untainted by the cynicism of his world. She would be the perfect wife, presentable, obedient, and, most importantly, easy to control. Or so he thought. The wedding was a spectacle, a lavish affair that made headlines across the country. Emily felt like a stranger in her own life, a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. She wore a custom-designed gown that cost more than her family's bakery made in a year, but it felt heavy, like a costume she couldn't wait to take off. Alexander, on the other hand, was the picture of composure. He smiled for the cameras, shook hands with the guests, and played the part of the doting groom to perfection. But behind the facade, he was as cold and distant as ever. The ceremony was a blur for Emily, a whirlwind of faces and voices that she couldn't quite place. When it was over, she found herself standing in the penthouse, staring out at the city lights, wondering what she had gotten herself into. Alexander was polite but distant, treating her more like an employee than a wife. He gave her a credit card, a driver, and a list of rules. Don't ask about his past, don't interfere with his work, and don't expect anything more than what was agreed upon. Emily nodded, swallowing her pride and her fear. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Alexander, who had always been so guarded, started to let his walls down just a little. He noticed the way Emily's eyes lit up when she talked about her family, the way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. She was different from anyone he had ever met, and it intrigued him. For her part, Emily began to see glimpses of the man behind the mask. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when he talked about his childhood, the way he avoided certain topics, as if they were landmines waiting to explode. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. And despite herself, she began to care. Their interactions, once stiff and formal, became more relaxed. They started to share meals together, talking about everything and nothing. Alexander found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way Emily's laughter filled the silence. It was a small change, but it was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about love. Meanwhile, Emily was struggling with her own feelings. She had entered this marriage with no expectations, but now she found herself wanting more. She wanted to know the real Alexander, the man behind the billionaire facade. She wanted to understand why he was so closed off, why he seemed so afraid to let anyone in. But every time she tried to get closer, he pulled away, retreating behind his walls. It was a dance, a push and pull that left her frustrated and confused. And then there was the matter of her own heart. She had never been in love before, and she wasn't sure if what she was feeling was real or just a product of circumstance. Was she falling for Alexander, or was she just desperate for connection? The more she thought about it, the more tangled her emotions became. As if their personal struggles weren't enough, external forces began to complicate things. Alexander's business rivals, sensing weakness, started to circle like vultures. Rumors began to spread about his marriage, with some suggesting that it was nothing more than a sham. The media, always hungry for a scandal, started digging into Emily's past, uncovering secrets she had tried to leave behind. And then there was Alexander's ex, a woman named Victoria, who seemed determined to sabotage their relationship at every turn. She was beautiful, cunning, and ruthless, with a personal vendetta against Alexander. She had once been his closest confidant, but their relationship had ended in betrayal, leaving her bitter and vengeful. Now, she saw Emily as a threat, a naive girl who had taken her place, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get rid of her. Amidst all this chaos, Emily found an unexpected ally in Alexander's younger brother, Daniel. Unlike Alexander, Daniel was warm and approachable, with a charm that put people at ease. He had always been the black sheep of the family, more interested in art and music than in business. But he had a sharp mind and a kind heart, and he quickly became a friend to Emily. They bonded over their shared love of books and music, and Daniel became her confidant, the one person she could talk to about her fears and doubts. But their friendship didn't go unnoticed. Alexander, who had always been protective of his brother, began to feel a twinge of jealousy. He didn't like the way Daniel and Emily laughed together, the way they seemed to understand each other so easily. It was a feeling he couldn't quite explain, and it only added to the tension between him and Emily. As the stakes grew higher, the lines between love and duty began to blur. Emily found herself caught in a web of secrets and lies, unsure of who to trust. Alexander, meanwhile, was forced to confront the demons of his past, the ones he had spent a lifetime running from. And just when it seemed like they might find a way to make it work, a bombshell dropped. Alexander's ex, Victoria, revealed a secret that threatened to destroy everything. She claimed that Alexander had been involved in a scandal years ago, one that could ruin his reputation and his business. Emily was torn. Did she believe Victoria, or did she trust the man she was starting to care for? The answer could change everything. But before she could make a decision, another twist emerged. Daniel, who had always been so supportive, dropped a bombshell of his own. He confessed that he had feelings for Emily, feelings he had been trying to suppress. It was a revelation that left her reeling, unsure of what to do or how to feel. And as if that wasn't enough, Alexander's business began to unravel, with his rivals closing in and his empire teetering on the brink of collapse. The pressure was mounting, and Emily found herself at a crossroads. Should she stay and fight for the man she was starting to love, or should she walk away and protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain: the stakes had never been higher. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more complicated, a mysterious figure from Alexander's past resurfaced, bringing with them a secret that could change everything. Who were they, and what did they want? The answer would shake the foundation of Emily and Alexander's relationship, forcing them to confront truths they had been avoiding. But for now, the mystery remained, a shadow looming over their fragile bond. The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. And as the story unfolded, one thing became clear: this was only the beginning. The real drama was yet to come. So, what happens next? Will Emily and Alexander find a way to overcome the obstacles in their path? Or will their love story end in tragedy? You'll have to keep watching to find out. But one thing's for sure, this is a story you won't want to miss. The revelation of Daniel's feelings for Emily sent shockwaves through the already fragile dynamic of the Blackwood household. Emily, who had come to rely on Daniel as her only true friend in this unfamiliar world, now found herself questioning every interaction they'd ever had. Had she been blind to his feelings, or had she chosen to ignore them because it was easier than confronting the truth? She couldn't deny that Daniel had been a source of comfort in her chaotic new life, but the idea of reciprocating his feelings felt impossible. Her heart, as tangled as it was, seemed to lean toward Alexander, despite his cold exterior and the walls he kept firmly in place. But with Daniel's confession hanging in the air, Emily felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her. She didn't want to hurt him, but she also couldn't pretend to feel something she didn't. The tension between the three of them became palpable, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface of their carefully constructed lives. Meanwhile, Alexander was grappling with his own demons. The scandal Victoria had threatened to expose was more than just a business misstep. It was a deeply personal betrayal that had haunted him for years. Years ago, he had trusted someone he shouldn't have, and the fallout had nearly destroyed him. He had buried the memory, locking it away in the darkest corners of his mind, but now it was resurfacing, threatening to unravel everything he had built. The thought of Emily finding out terrified him. He had always prided himself on his control, his ability to keep his emotions in check. But with Emily, it was different. She had a way of seeing through his defenses, of making him feel things he had long since forgotten. And that scared him more than any scandal ever could. He found himself torn between the instinct to push her away and the desperate need to keep her close. But how could he protect her from the storm that was coming when he could barely protect himself? As if the personal turmoil wasn't enough, Alexander's business empire began to crumble under the weight of the rumors and accusations. His rivals, sensing blood in the water, launched a coordinated attack, spreading lies and half-truths designed to destroy his credibility. The media, always eager for a juicy story, amplified the chaos, painting Alexander as a ruthless tycoon with a dark past. Emily watched helplessly as the man she was starting to care for was publicly vilified, his reputation torn to shreds. She wanted to help, to stand by his side and fight for him. But Alexander kept her at arm's length, insisting that she stay out of it. "This is my battle," he told her, his voice cold and distant. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he was pushing her away because he was afraid of letting her in, afraid of what might happen if she saw the real him. And that fear only made her more determined to break through his walls. In the midst of all this chaos, the mysterious figure from Alexander's past made their move. It was a woman named Clara, someone Alexander had known years ago, before he became the billionaire he was today. She appeared out of nowhere, her presence like a ghost from a life he had tried to forget. Clara was beautiful, with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, and she carried with her a secret that could destroy Alexander completely. She claimed to have evidence of his involvement in a crime, something so damning that it would not only ruin his business but also land him in prison. Alexander knew she wasn't bluffing. Clara had always been ruthless, and if she was coming after him now, it was because she had something big. But what did she want? Money? Revenge? Or something more? Alexander didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let Emily find out. He had to protect her, even if it meant pushing her further away. Emily, however, was no longer willing to be kept in the dark. She had spent too much of her life being passive, letting others make decisions for her. But this time, she was determined to take control. She began to dig into Alexander's past, piecing together fragments of information from conversations, old news articles, and the occasional slip of the tongue. What she found was a mosaic of pain and betrayal, a story of a man who had been shaped by his scars. She learned about his troubled childhood, the betrayal that had nearly broken him, and the choices he had made to survive. And the more she learned, the more she understood why he was the way he was. But understanding wasn't enough. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "And so," she confronted Alexander, demanding answers. "You can't keep shutting me out," she told him, her voice trembling with emotion. "If we're going to make this work, you have to trust me." Alexander, caught off guard by her determination, found himself at a crossroads. He had spent his entire life building walls to keep people out, but now, faced with Emily's unwavering resolve, he felt those walls beginning to crack. He wanted to tell her everything, to let her in, but the fear of losing her was paralyzing. What if she couldn't handle the truth? What if she walked away? The thought was unbearable, but so was the idea of continuing to lie to her. In the end, he made a decision that would change everything. He agreed to tell her the truth, but only if she promised to hear him out completely, without judgment. Emily, her heart pounding, agreed. And so Alexander began to unravel the story of his past, a tale of betrayal, loss, and redemption that would test the limits of their relationship. But just as Alexander was about to reveal the final piece of the puzzle, an unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. Clara, the woman from his past, made her move, leaking a portion of the evidence she had to the media. The story exploded overnight, painting Alexander as a criminal and sending shockwaves through his business and personal life. Emily, reeling from the revelations, found herself torn between her growing feelings for Alexander and the harsh reality of what he had done. Could she forgive him for his past mistakes? Or was this the final straw? And what about Daniel, who had been quietly supporting her through it all? His feelings for her were no secret, and now, with Alexander's world crumbling around him, Emily found herself questioning everything. Who could she trust? And more importantly, who did she want to be with? As the story hurtled toward its climax, the stakes had never been higher. Alexander's empire was on the brink of collapse, his reputation in tatters. Emily was caught in a web of secrets and lies, unsure of where her loyalties lay. And Daniel, who had always been the voice of reason, found himself at a crossroads, forced to choose.